Members, will you? Members, we're just about to start. Do you think we could have a bit of hush, please? Thank you very much. Good evening, members, and welcome to this last Policy and Resources Committee meeting of the municipal year. Before we start on the agenda, may I take this opportunity to advise you that if the fire alarm does sound, please remain seated. It is not to enable Miss Tunnicliffe, it is to enable Sam to assess the situation and give further instructions on the evacuation of the building if necessary. Tonight's proceedings will be webcast by the Council, but if anyone else is intending to record these proceedings, can you please let me know now? I ask this question not to stop you, but merely to ensure that members and other members of the public in the room know that this is taking place, and I cannot see that anyone is indicating. Members, we may have a couple of late arrivals. The traffic is absolutely grim out there, almost at a standstill all the way round Maidstone, so we'll start, but say hi to people as they actually duly arrive. I have received apologies from Councillors Fermor and McLaughlin. Have we any substitute members, please? Yes,
Councillor Joy for Councillor Fermor.
Councillor Ring for Councillor Bryce.
Before we go any further, I'd just like to say that I'm sure this committee would like to send its condolences to the family of ex-councillor De Souza. That was very sad news that we all heard, so I'm sure you'll agree to that if we can do that. Thank you very much. And because of when this meeting is taking place in relation to elections, I'm just going to call on our legal officer to actually say a few words.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is just a reminder regarding the pre-election publicity rules that was circulated. It's just a reminder during deliberations in this meeting to be mindful about the guidance that was provided, and also to ensure that the deliberations do not in any way promote a particular candidate or political party, so that we can abide by the publicity rules. Thank you.
Right. Members, agenda item 3, as far as I'm aware, there are no urgent items. And notification of visiting members. If you could come up to the microphone, please, and say which item you are here for.
Chairman, item 16 on the agenda.
Thank you. Councillor Daly.
Thank you. Item 16 again. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's Diana Lewis. Right. Are there any disclosures by members and officers? Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chairman. In relation to item 15, the Moat Park Lake Dam, in my work role, in my professional role, I have a legal and regulatory duty in relation to safety for reservoirs, so I will leave the room whilst that matter is being discussed. Thank you.
I also gather that Mrs. Hudd will make a disclosure re-1 Maidstone when she arrives, but she's also somewhat delayed. Are there any disclosures of lobbying? I think I've been lobbied on item 16. If you would note that, please.
Yes, I've been lobbied on 16.
Yes? And others? Right. So that's Councillor Cox and Councillor Harwood. There are no Part 2 items, as far as I'm aware. So we go straight to agenda item 8, pages 1 to 6, minutes of the meeting held on the 28th of March. I'll take them page by page for accuracy, please. Page 1, page 2, 3, page 4, page 5, page 6. Members, can I sign those as an accurate record? Thank you very much. Do we have any petitions? No petitions. And questions and answers from members of the public? Thank you. Right. I'm advised that Councillor Daly needs to get away as quickly as possible. I'm going to ask you if we can take it as the second item tonight, because we do really need Mrs. Shepherd here as well for that particular, it's item 16 for that particular item. So if we can, we'll turn straight to the digital strategy on pages 7 to 30. And if you agree, after that we'll go to item 16. Is that agreed, members? Thank you. Right, can we... Oh.
Apologies, Chairman. I've been stuck on the A26. I just apologise for being late.
Can we go through the usual procedure? Do you have anything to declare?
Nothing to declare, and I haven't been lobbied. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. I should have said that as we go to the items, please come up. It's just there aren't enough chairs for all of you. Come round there. Fire away. Good evening.
Thank you. The digital strategy in your documents details the Council's approach to digital technology up to 2021 and is essentially a continuation of the previous customer service improvement strategy, which has already had very successful in using digital technology to improve services and enable services to work more efficiently. The introduction to the strategy, which are on pages 15 to 17 in your pack, were developed in partnership with the other Mid-Kent councils to ensure a consistency in approach and to reduce the impact on delivery on the shared IT services. The strategy itself focuses on two key areas: a digital community, which covers things like how our customers communicate and interact with us, and a digital council, which covers how the council might harness technology to work more efficiently. Pages 20 to 27 in your pack also shows a list of actions and projects that were identified with department managers as part of the development of the strategy, and this includes a high-level timetable of when these projects are likely to take place. I'm happy to take any questions.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this report. I thought it was really encouraging to read. It's nice to see such innovative ideas. I know we've spoken outside of the meeting, but can I just ask you to confirm one thing for me? All the systems that we're talking about in here, will they be accessibility friendly for those that are, say, deaf or blind? Will they be able to use them with ease?
Yes, as part of the development of systems that we currently use and any future systems that we plan to have, accessibility is a key consideration in the development and design of those, and will continue to be so.
Thank you very much. In light of that, I'm happy to propose the recommendations on the paper.
Second.
Councillor Cox just pipped you to the post, I think. So that's been moved and seconded, but I do have other speakers who wish to speak. First of all, it is Councillor Perry.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just 2 points that struck me, and particularly on page 21. There's a lot of this could have cost implications, and there's no indication about the cost of any of this. And the second point, some of the wording, and believe me, I'm a bit old-fashioned on this, but could you translate for me what use an agile approach to building services following our discover, build, measure and iterate model? Could you put that into plain English, what you mean by that? Thank you.
Yes, in terms of the cost, yes, very much. A lot of the projects or actions that are listed within the table of projects are still yet to be fully scoped and will need to be worked on with a business case developed. So The benefits of any of those projects need to be weighed up against the cost of delivering those. And decisions on each of those projects will have to be made separately. In terms of the agile iterative approach, yes, I accept that's perhaps quite a bit of technical jargon there. In simple terms, it's a way of making sure that we deliver and design systems or processes that take into account customers' needs. So rather than spending months and months designing a system and then releasing it for public use and finding that it doesn't meet the customer's needs, it's about delivering, designing systems piece by piece, and at each stage checking that it's delivering what we want it to deliver and delivering something that the customer will actually use and benefit from.
Do you want to come back, Councillor Perry?
I have no problem with this use of the word customer all the time. It goes back about 25 years when British Rail started calling us all customers. But yes, along with the sandwich, yes, I can. But we work for our residents more than anything else, and it's our residents who have the issues here. And I would like a bit more reference to our residents rather than this customer word, which has sort of marketing implications, which do put me off ever so slightly. I'm sorry, I don't. This is not getting at you, but
so do you have
I'm a bit old-fashioned on these things.
Do you have a proposal to make, Councillor?
Well, I don't. It's not so. I mean, I realise this has been drafted in a particular way. I don't particularly, but presumably this. Can I use the word iterative? Can't even say it, iterative process. So this will be coming back to us from time to time, I assume, and I hope next time when it comes back, it'll perhaps have more cost implications of this attached to it. So I can leave it as it is for the moment. I just want to make the point, that we don't want to get down too much in the weeds at this stage. I fully understand that, but it is our residents that I want to see supported. Thank you.
Before we move on to the next speaker, in light of your first question, could I just turn to Mr. Green and perhaps asking what provisions in the capital programme for this work?
Yes, in principle, we have to operate within the budget that the Council has agreed. There is a provision in the capital programme for annual spend on ICT, so the specific things mentioned here will be within that, but as Gary has said, if there are new initiatives that meet the Council's criteria in terms of being able to generate a return, then clearly we will also look at those. But the basic message is, yes, we will deliver it within the budget.
Thank you. So can I move on to Councillor Borton, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. To echo what Councillor Perry says about customers, I think there's a very easy amendment that you could make, and that is in the documents, just replace the word customer with resident. I think that would solve sort of all the questions, because I agree, no one gets a choice as to whether they opt into certain council services and whether they pay their council tax or not, so we should be referring to them across the council as residents and not as customers. But turning to the actual specifics of this document in front of us, bearing in mind sort of the ethos of this council, it's understandable that we've created a digital strategy. I think that makes sense, and on the whole I think the document's good, and I know I've spoken to Mr. Green before about some ideas related to this, and I met with him and Councillor Firmer a while back and discussed some of the things. I do have a couple of questions, Madam Chair, which are quite specific to sort of issues in here, which I just think this might be a good forum to ask. Starting with page 16 in the customers, which I hope I would refer to as residents column on the far left, firstly, it says the Council will implement a digital inclusion strategy to ensure those who cannot use digital services will not be excluded. Well, we've got an inclusion strategy for those who are, for whatever reason, excluded from sort of online services. I don't really think that makes sense, or is probably the appropriate phrasing to sort of refer to an inclusion strategy. Surely we should just sort of word that slightly better to say that we will have alternative provisions for those who can't, for whatever reason, access any of our services online. Just going down, turning to the final point, where appropriate, the Council will take an active role in conversations on social media. I take the view that this council isn't necessarily a commentator on what happens, but is more participant in the way and the daily life of the town, really. And I think we should probably, I would take that bullet point out altogether because I think it's sort of, it's not needed. It doesn't add anything to the document. But I'm uncomfortable with the fact that that we should be saying that the council sort of commentates on events. Well, we're here to deliver services. We're not here to talk about it. We're here for action. Ultimately. Just turning further on in the document, on page 20 there's a lot of very good stuff about broadband delivery, but would it be possible to include something about mobile phone signal in there as well, because that is as much, if not an increasing problem, particularly in our very rural areas as well, where you can't make a phone call. So just those couple of points, Madam Chair, but on the whole, I think the document's good. I think the timeline for delivery is actually pretty accurate and pretty realistic as well, and it's just those few things which I'd like some greater clarity on. Thank you.
Officers, would you like to respond?
I think all valid points, and I'm happy to take those away and look to make changes if that's what we feel is necessary.
Councillor, first of all, I forgot to ask Councillor Cox if he wished to reserve his right, and he is waving at me, so I need to go to him. Do you want to come back on those specific points?
Yes, really, because I think it is pertinent to bring them in now and not let them drift off. We often speak within the council about customer satisfaction. We don't necessarily always speak about, although it would mean the same, resident satisfaction. Many people who ring in or use our facilities, go online, are from out of our borough sometimes. They may be a licence person from Canterbury wanting to come here with the need for a licence. I think the word customer is more worldly, it's more encompassing. I think we're dangerous if we try to change one word throughout the whole document, because I think it will have more inferences throughout it, and it might not do us a service to do that, because people are often paying for things and therefore they are customers. I take the point about our residents, and they're the people who have got us where we are, but I would also think that they do feel themselves that they are customers to us as well, because when they ring up if their bins haven't been collected, they've been paying for that service. So I do think it's important. I do think it's important to look at this and not just necessarily a knee-jerk reaction to change one word. If advice changes that, then I think it would be we need to do that under advice from either legal or the officers, because I think there are implications.
Mrs. Broome.
I understand the point being made about the use of the word residents. I do think that there is a danger, though, in wholesale replacement of one word with another, because the people who are consuming the service, many of whom are residents, but are also businesses, parish councils, other organisations with which we interact. I was taken with the suggestion that Councillor Perry made, which was when the strategy perhaps comes back at a point of review, that there perhaps could be some nuancing to reflect the comments being made about the nomenclature. But I do think there is a risk that if you simply make a wholesale change, that the baby will be perhaps thrown out of the bathwater. So maybe that slightly more measured approach might accommodate everybody's concerns.
And Councillor Borton, you've said what you'd like, but you haven't framed it in a way that we can put in minutes. In other words, much as the officer wishes to be accommodating, we have a document here which we are to approve or not, as the case may be. So if you want a change to it, you will need to actually say what change you wish to make.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Right, on the customers' residence issue, as I said at the start, this is more an issue not just with this document, this is throughout the council as a whole. And I'm very uncomfortable with having a document in front of me that doesn't refer, and I've just looked through it, I can't see the word residents anywhere in it, and that leaves me in quite an uncomfortable position if I was to be asked to approve it. On the other 2 points I made, a couple of suggestions. Firstly, that would be to remove the final point on the left-hand column on page 16. That addresses that concern I had. And the second point would be to add a bullet point under the "we will" section on page 20 at the end, which would say something along the lines, and I'm sort of, this is coming straight out of my head, I've not written this down in advance, which would be that we will work with mobile phone providers to ensure that mobile phone signal remains strong and gets better in areas where there are significant not spots.
Just wait a second.
What was that final bit? Where areas where? Okay. Do you want me to read what I've got so far, and then? So I've put underneath the bit that says "we will work with mobile phone providers to ensure that mobile phone signal remains strong and improves in areas where," and I just need the last few words.
Where in areas where it is weak already, something like that. Well, I can't remember what I said.
Where coverage is poor? Yeah.
Right, have you got it? Yeah. Okay. Is that seconded? Right, Councillor Ring has seconded it. We don't need to go to a vote if Councillor Harvey is prepared to accept it as an addition. Will you not accept it as an addition? Right, then we go to the vote. Wait a minute. So those in favour of this amendment, only this bit. Oh, no, sorry, if you want to debate it, yes, please. Sorry. I'm feeling very end of termish. You'll have to forgive me. So, yes, Councillor Harper, yes.
The second part, which is about mobile phone reception, I think is eminently sensible. I'm not so certain about the first part. So I'd like to see us voting on the two parts separately. If I could just say a couple of words about this issue to customer or ratepayers or whatever. I think perhaps it might be useful as a future meeting we have a sort of more an approach, say, to simple English or something, just so we make it quite clear when we're having documents which refer, say, to residents of the borough or commercial, the business community of the borough and so on, that it potentially is spelt out, because I think the word customer can be a bit nebulous and doesn't necessarily get across what we're actually meaning. Now, as someone said, obviously some people come from outside of the borough, but generally we are talking in these types of things probably about our business community and our residential community. And I think if we can just think in terms of our sort of, I suppose, our style of English, how we can perhaps reflect on that for moving forward, because I think that would pick up, a valid point made by Councillor Perry and Councillor Bolton, but in a way at which, we don't lose the nuances that we have the business community as well as a residential community.
Thanks. Councillor Ring, it's my fault, but I was actually asking if you were going to second that specific amendment. Are you actually seconding all three suggestions? No, there's three, because it's let's be clear. Let's be clear about this. We've had a suggestion that we should change the word of customer to resident. We've had.
Right. Here's what I'll do. I'll drop the vote on page 16 and the customer resident issue, but I'll remain, as an amendment, the one about mobile phone signal.
Right. Yes, I think they will. And I apologise, because that's my fault for confusion, because I actually meant that we were just moving. I was asking if you'd accept that one bit, to be honest, because we hadn't gone with the others. Now, hang on a minute. I think we'll get this one out of the way, unless does anybody wish to speak to that particular bit of the amendment? Do you remember what the wording was? Read it out, please.
So that particular part of the amendment was the addition of, on page 20, we will work with mobile phone providers to ensure that mobile phone signal remains strong and improves in areas where coverage is poor.
So, Councillor Harvey, are you prepared to accept that as part? Thank you. So then we come back to, you've removed the other two, but I still have a list of people who wish to speak. So that's Councillor Ring, you were on the list.
I don't really think this document is enough for wherever we go, and I know there's lots of people sitting around here that are really up to their technology and whiz kids and know everything that's going. I still live in an area of deprivation where I see them go up the road to learn how to use a computer, and I don't think that you're doing anything for them people here. They're going to be there. There's a lot of us at the moment. Give us another 30 years and we might not be around. But until that time happens, there are people that still don't understand what it is this council actually is about, apart from when they walk down with the bill and they pay it. So I really don't think you've been fair on the people that haven't come along yet. And where are you going to place these people? Exactly. How much does that cost? Where are you going to hold these classes for these people to understand the way the world's moving? Because it's really not fair. In this document, does it explain any of that? And there are still people there that will not understand. Where do you lead them? And that is not a customer. That is that word why I don't like it. It is a resident. Whatever resident does, whatever education they have, they are expected to pay their council tax. And that comes into Maidstone Borough Council. What you've got to do is show them the right way to be able to do that. So I don't think this document says that anywhere.
Officers, do you just want to come back and explain briefly the assistance that is given to people when they're transferred or when we're trying to persuade them to move to digital use? Because I believe a lot of work's been done in that direction. Do you want to come back or not?
Well, I think we have previously done quite a bit of work on digital inclusion, but you'll note that in the document itself, what we've said is, you know what, we need to have a look at that again, and that involves looking at what is required, who the people who are digitally excluded are. When we can look at, we know the types of people, we know that nationally, there's plenty of research out there, and there are also plenty of third sector organisations who are offering support as well. So we need to understand that whole network, and then have a proper strategy to be able to do that. But I think things, as I say, things have been done. There is support out there, but what we're recognising in this document is that we need to have a look at that again and get it in a firm strategy.
Want to come back, Councillor Ring?
I'd like to really see what you mean by that, because the chairperson has just turned around and said there's lots of things being done. You told me no different to what I already know. So I would like to see where that is actually leading, who these people are that are going to be helping you out with this, because I'd like to think that it's different people that have been doing it for the same 10 years. Thank you.
Councillor Ring, might I suggest then it might be very helpful if you had a session yourself with the officers, because if you have specific examples of things that make it difficult for people, then that would be helpful to the officers, I think. So perhaps we could put you together to do that. Councillor Gooch.
Thank you, Chairman. Funnily enough, one of my questions was going to be about page 19, under digital customer, making sure there are digital services for all residents of the borough, and that sounds enormously ambitious because, as my colleague has just said, there are people who either aren't able or who will never get the hang of it. So I think somewhere I would like to see here a reassurance that there will be somebody somewhere, whether it is a voluntary group, somebody from social services or Involve, or a member of staff here, there will be somebody for those people to go to who just can't hack it. I'm certainly no techie myself, and I was actually going to also ask that there is, when we go onto the screen, when we try to go digital, that there is an option that says none of these, because I don't believe that you're going to have a box for absolutely everything. It just doesn't happen. So I would just ask you to think about that. I wouldn't want to change the document, because I think the document per se is the right direction to go, and it's what we should be aiming for. You've got to start somewhere. Well, we've been doing this for a few years now. I appreciate that. One bit of clarification I would like, please, is on page 18, you've got it gives the context of 1.1 million website visits in 2017. Well, website, is that to all 3 districts? Is it just to the Maidstone districts? Maidstone district? That doesn't actually tell me anything. And 16,000 residents have chosen e-billing. I think what would have been more helpful would have been if it had been in percentages, because the next line down, you've got a string of percentages. So you're certainly muddling my brain up. I couldn't understand that bit, didn't mean much to me. But if you'd have said over 50% of residents have chosen e-billing, I would have been impressed by that. Is that a reasonable request? Because it's just... But other than that, well done. I think a hell of a lot of work has gone into this. Thank you, Chairman.
Members, in view of what Councillor Ring and Councillor Gooch have said, do you think that it would be advisable to ask Mr Green to put into the future work programme for this committee an update on how we're moving forward with the issue of ensuring that everybody has access to the services and how we're assisting those who may have difficulty? Would you, so we can just minute that for yes, Councillor Ring. Well, I think as the basic item is on this committee, it should start with something coming back here, and then this committee can always refer it if they feel that there's more work needs to be done. So if we just have a minute to that effect, and Mr Green, if you'd put it into the work programme, that would be great. Nobody else has indicated, so I intend moving to the vote. It's that the digital strategy is adopted with the addition that we've already agreed. So those in favour, please, will you show? That is unanimous. That's unanimous. Thank you very much for your work. And so I can see that Mrs Shepherd is here. So we will move to the last item on the agenda, please, which is agenda item 16. This is the first committee meeting, I believe, that Mr Williams has come to, and I'm not sure whether everybody has been introduced to him. So, Mr Williams, perhaps you'd like to say what your proper title is, because I can never remember.
Good evening, it's Andrew Williams. I'm the Parks and Open Spaces Manager.
And so, Mr Williams, without further ado, if you'd like to lead us into the item, please. You will find it on pages 80 to 89.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. What's before you this evening is the consideration of the opportunity to acquire a woodland known locally as Bluebell Wood. It's off Hermitage Lane and it's currently part of the Crowdace development site north of the hospital. Land has been offered to the council at no cost. It's a mixture of ancient woodland and open grassland. The opportunity has been put forward by Crowdace to the council. We're asking for your consideration to support the acquisition, but in particular note in paragraph 1.4 we have estimated costs of maintaining the land at approximately £3,000 per annum. Also consider paragraph 1.5 in our strategic plan for parks and open spaces. We do make a consideration when land is offered to the council that it shouldn't place a financial burden on the council. In the very early discussions with Crowdace Homes, there is an offer of a sum of money which can be negotiated, which we are asking for committee to give consideration to Mr Green to enter into those negotiations to secure funding for at least 15 years ongoing management. And I think that pretty much sums up the options.
Councillor Daly, you wish to say a few words.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. When I received the papers, I was mightily relieved in a way because I knew that we would need to have your agreement to proceed with this. And the way in which this report has been written, I think that most of us can agree has been very successfully but very thoroughly done. I've been looking at it from all points of view, mainly from those of the residents who've been pressing for probably nearly 20 years now to do something about what they lovingly call Bluebell Wood. That is not a title which is given a sort of just on the side, because when the bluebells are out, they are magnificent. This is ancient woodland, and we've noted that in a variety of ways, and particularly at the appeal when it was noted. The arguments range around that. It is ancient woodland. The soil is of great importance and must be managed properly. How that was managed, I think, is something that we wanted to look at quite seriously. And in discussions which have taken place, it was decided really that it would be a good idea if the Borough Council, on behalf of the people, took the management on board so that it could be done according to all the various professional ways in which woodland ought to be looked after over a number of years. I don't want to say any more than that, really, other than to say that I think if you are in agreement to do this tonight, Mr Green will probably have the most easy cooperation, I would think, in his career when it comes to term of trying to get some money out of a developer, because I think that most of the work has been done in the past. There have been figures mentioned in here which I think will be able to be agreed. So that's that. I think the residents of the area will be relieved also to know that they're going to have this wonderful woodland in their possession in a way for at least the next 15 years, and more than that I would suggest, possibly because there's so much development in the area, that there will be some more money to come forward, I would think, later on. So that, I want to say, I'm looking at the recommendations on the front of the paper today, on page, well, I can't see the page on here, but anyway, you know the one I mean, and I'm looking at those, and if those are agreed tonight, I think everybody will be delighted, and we look forward to that, and thank you very much for listening.
Councillor Lewins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I echo exactly what Councillor Daly's just spoken about, and thank you for everyone who's been involved in acquiring this site. If we do acquire this site, it will benefit from the latest Biodiversity Action Plan, which is currently being refreshed at the moment, which was agreed at the Heritage, Culture and Leisure Committee on the 30th of the 1st. So I do hope that we are able to acquire this and increase the biodiversity in the area. Thank you.
Councillor Cox, you were first.
Thank you very much. We've heard from 2 ward members about this piece of land. I think it's been in a lot of press and a lot of social media as well. The people have turned out to try and protect it. And I think the position that we've found, and thank you very much to Mr. Williams for presenting being the author of this report. I think it is thorough. I'm very pleased that we're able to find an injection of funds to look after it as well, so it shouldn't become a burden to us. And indeed, I'm sure you will find, as many of our residents do, that they will want to keep it clean and tidy and leave it as natural as possible. I'm sure that's the intention. With that in mind, I would like to propose the motion before us as it's set out on the report.
Thank you. And Councillor Harwood, you'd indicated next to speak in any case.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I mean, it's serendipitous that this item is on the agenda today, because just yesterday, Forest Research and the Woodland Trust released a league table, if you like, of towns and cities in the UK and how much tree cover they retain. And sadly, Maidstone was certainly languishing in the bottom half in the Kent League and is down there and bumping along the bottom with a few coastal towns which are not exactly hospitable to trees anyway. And we've got 2-3 times less trees than Tunbridge Wells, Canterbury, towns such as that. So I think it's really important that we look after our remaining trees and woodland and indeed expand them. And I actually think there's a bigger point here in that historically Maidstone Council took on quite a lot of land when planning applications were received. And a lot of those sites are now much loved, cherished and really well maintained and looked after sites with much community engagement and involvement. We don't do that as a matter of course now, and it does place question marks over pieces of land, and you're aware of the current email exchanges going on around the Lilk Meadow in Bearsted. And I suggest that's another site that if we were to take it on, we could ensure it was appropriately looked after. With a site such as this area of woodland, there are many comparisons. 5 Acre Wood and Wentz Wood at the top of Weavering Street, an example, but that is maintained by commercial coppicing companies, and we run a small profit on it. So this is certainly not a millstone around the council's neck. I'm very happy to second, but I hope that this is the first of many sites that Maidstone Borough Council takes on, and as we move into community infrastructure levy, cash coming into urban areas which are not parish, where local councils and so on will have quite a big role in looking where that money goes. I think there's a sustainable way of funding open space such as this.
Thank you. Councillor Harper.
Obviously, it's a very good idea. I think one of the things we need to bear in mind in terms of working with the community is the amount of usage the site gets currently, which is very heavily used for people dog walking and so on. But equally, when all the housing development around it goes ahead and it's sitting with a road cutting through the middle of it, it's going to be really intensively used, and the attempts so far by the developers to put in some mitigating planting have been a failure, to say the least. So I think it's an important piece of land, but maintenance has to be very particular to ensure that it doesn't degrade very quickly once all that housing's in place?
Councillor Borden.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm always slightly wary for sort of obvious reasons when councils try and acquire stuff, because I don't necessarily think it's the council's role to run every service and every woodland in the borough. So I did read this with a degree of caution. I can understand where the ward members are coming from and bearing in mind the development that's taking place up there. So, irrespective of where we are in how much woodland we've got and how many trees we've got, I'm looking at this in terms of this does have, as I think was acknowledged in the report, bring a risk to the council, naturally, when you require stuff. So could the officers expand a bit more from what they said in their opening remarks on, firstly, the annual cost of £3,000 to manage the woodlands? As Councillor Harper just said, we're expecting, with the development up there, this to have a significantly heavier usage than we have at the moment. I mean, you'd expect that because there's more people living in the area, so more people to sort of enjoy it. So has that been factored into your calculations to reach this 3,000 figure? And secondly, on the issue of the negotiations looking to provide a sum for 15 years management, well, in the grand scheme of sort of preserving the ancient woodland, 15 years isn't very long, I don't think, anyway, because, of course, you'd hope it would be there for as long as possible. So, again, could you provide more detail, really, on what you would, why 15 years? Is that, where's that figure come from? And what happens after the 15 years, were we to go ahead with this acquisition, and what the burden would be on the council's resources?
Would you like to come back?
The document has been, or the proposal has been risk assessed, so very much looking at the realities of a population that will be increasing in the area, would potentially bring more littering. There is greater potential for antisocial behaviour. All the negatives can be factored in, but in the kind of the sense check, we also need to think about the opportunities for local residents. So of increased activity, recreation, access to green space and so on. The risk management process really has considered that carefully, and if I sense checked by Jen, the 15-year period could be argued to be arbitrary, but it's a realistic proposition to bring a site a certain amount of stability, understanding how it is functioning, and within that period we'll also see a new generation of families moving into the area and see how it operates. The alternative to have in perpetuity management would require a significant endowment that would generate a return of around about £3,000 now, but obviously increasing for inflation into the future. Yet to be decided how that sum, when secured, could be invested or just drawn down upon over 15 years, and that is something that perhaps Mr. Green could comment on.
Thank you. I think what I would say is that, and it kind of goes without saying for if and when Mr. Green opens sort of his negotiations, and I know Councillor Daly said there should be a relatively easy negotiation, but I think it might be in the Council's best interest to try and get a sort of an appropriate commuted sum for as long as possible. If they agree 15 years, they agree 15 years. But I think we'd all agree that we should look for that as long as possible. On the £3,000, as you rightly said, Mr. Williams, with regards to sort of the impact on littering and antisocial behaviour, I do think that needs careful monitoring, because just like any other park in the borough, and I'm sure you and your team will do that well, because the reality is, as we sort of take on the responsibility, we do encounter problems that perhaps weren't foreseen, and I think as soon as we do go ahead and do this, it will be sort of helpful for your team to sort of keep quite a close eye on it. But I'm satisfied with obviously the answers that you gave, so thank you.
Thank you. Nobody else has indicated. that the recommendations have been moved by Councillor Cox, seconded by Councillor Harwood. Could I have those in favour, please? I'll come to that. Are you not voting? No? Against? Abstentions? I didn't see. Are you abstaining, Councillor Garland? I know. We will have to take it again. I know what I've got to do. Okay. No, I know she won't because she came so late. Could I have those? Councillor Blackmore, I know can vote, but I know that she will not because I know Councillor Blackmore well enough. So could we have the vote taken again then, please? Those in favour? Right, thank you. So that is unanimous from those that have been here all the way through. Nice to see you, Councillor Blackmore. Can I ask you whether you have any disclosures of lobbying?
No disclosures, Madam Chairman.
And any other disclosures? No.
No further disclosures.
Right, thank you very much. That then is carried. Thank you for attending tonight, Councillor Daly. I can see you. Thank you, officers. You can go or stay as you choose. So, members, if we can go back to the agenda as it was originally written, it's item 12, the corporate risk update, which you'll find on pages 31 to 52. Right. So, is it Mrs. Blake or Miss? So, Mrs. Blake and Mr. Heatherstone, if you wish to lead us into this, please.
Good evening, members. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It's my pleasure to be here tonight to talk you through another risk update. So hopefully these will now be familiar and they follow on from the committee adopting our improved risk management framework back in 2016. And we've been coming to the committee twice a year to update you on the corporate risks that the council is managing, and also more generally to update you on how we're doing with implementing the council's risk management framework. So I'll just talk you through the report just quickly, if I may. First off, really, this is the first report since the council adopted the risk appetite statement, which was back in October last year, and that really set out the framework for how the council is identifying and monitoring high-level risks. So those are the risks that fall above the council's tolerance level. And so what that's enabled us to do is to come and look at the risks that have been identified over the last 6 or so months, and to start to refresh and look at how they're being monitored in line with that appetite. What we've tried to put in here is a bit more contextual information, which I know has been asked before, around risks that may be common for councils or public sector or more widely. So from pages 37 onwards, I've just done a bit of an analysis around key risks to that we're seeing our partners facing. And some key themes there around key projects that councils are delivering, housing restrictions or struggles around housing and homelessness, and also around funding and funding restrictions. So these are common risks that we see being faced, and what we're trying to do through this process is to share any kind of learning around how those risks are being managed, to really kind of maximise the value from the process. Moving on to the corporate risks themselves, you'll see from pages kind of 39, we've broken it down to show the kind of the highest level risks, and those that sit in the kind of the black and the red area, and how the movement of those risks has happened over the course of the last 6 months or so. And what that's trying to demonstrate is how kind of the risk changes over time and how the council is kind of responding to those risks. Most notably, the addition there of a risk around the general data protection regulations, which are quite huge, and also a recognition there of the contraction of the retail and leisure sector, which are coming up onto the corporate risk register because they've been identified as key kind of operational risks and have a potential impact on the council in its ability to deliver its objectives. So we're trying to outline there some changes to the risks as they evolve over time. And also in response to some previous questions last time round was, well, what is the foundation that this sits on? So from page 41 onwards, it gives you the operational risk profile. And those are the risks that services are managing day in and day out. And that's very much what the themes at that operational level is what we're escalating up here to the corporate level. So that's showing the thread between those corporate issues that we're trying to get a wider look at down to those that are being managed by services. Try not to include too much detail because they are being managed day to day, but it's hopefully giving you a bit of context behind the risk management process and it being something that's literally at all levels. I've included there an appendix around the corporate risks themselves, and then just a reminder really in the appendixes around the risk appetite statement and the definition levels. Just closing really just to say we are continuing this process to improve the council's risk management arrangements, and so on page 42 just giving you an idea of where we want to take it over the next year in terms of improving how the process works, but also in terms of creating a positive risk culture around the council, and that's through training and awareness, which is something we do at officer and also member level. So happy to take any questions. Thanks very much.
Councillor Blackmore, you were first.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I accept that a lot of this document is quite high level, Mr Huddleston, and I also accept that there is an element of operational analysis, but not too much, otherwise it could get rather verbose. However, and I've probably missed it, so please forgive me, but there's no mention about Brexit. Now, we did have a briefing paper a while ago. I think it came to this committee. I'm not quite sure. Maybe it came to full council about Brexit. What were the risks to the council? There may be nothing at all, but I couldn't find anything in here whatsoever, not even a brief mention towards it, and I wonder if there is anything. I mean, I can think of something specific in my ward because we have an awful lot of seasonal labour at fruit picking time, but I just wondered, is there anything that the council have picked up on, and should that not form part of the corporate risk register?
It's not currently on there. You're right, you haven't missed it. And it's certainly something that we can look at as part of our risk assessment process. One of the things that we do each year is a full workshop which includes members as well around identifying key risk issues. I think at the time when we first looked at this, there was so much uncertainty of what that impact might have been that it was how do we really nail this down into a narrative. But that doesn't say that it isn't a risk on some risk registers, but it's something we can certainly factor in for a future discussion.
Mr Blackmore, can I just bring in Mr Green first, and then I'll come back to you, because I think he wishes to add something.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Blackmore. The only thing I'd add to what Mr Huddleston said is that what the risk register is doing is addressing risks to the council, which is a bit different from potential risks to the economy of the Maidstone area. Now, of course, an adverse impact on the economy of the Maidstone area could affect the council. We could see business rates income falling. We could see increasing pressures if there's more homelessness, all those kind of things. And members of the Audit, Governance and Standards Committee will know that I take a financial risk register to that committee, which gives members updates on the financial risks, and that, I think, is how mainly the risk from Brexit that you allude to could affect us. Thank you.
Councillor Blackmore.
Okay, I'm just slightly concerned because Mr Huddleston said they have noted it, they are aware of it, but it's almost as if, oh, that's a little bit too big for us to deal with, so we'll just pop it to one side for the moment. I don't know, I just feel somewhere in this document it should at least be acknowledged bearing in mind it's going to be something huge that we face, even if it is just to say it's there and it has no immediate impact, but I do think it ought to be acknowledged.
Councillor Blackmore, can I just make a point that the Maidstone Economic Business Partnership has been talking about this quite a lot, and the chairman of that comes in and has regular meetings. Is it with yourself? With Mrs. Broome. So I think if we made the connection very strongly between that part, which it is there, but that partnership, Mrs. Broome and the officers, I'm sure we could put the whole thing together in a way that hopefully would satisfy you. Mrs. Broome, would you like to?
Perhaps just two observations to make. Certainly we can reflect in our contextual narrative what you've been saying. But I think to be more precise, we need to wait until we have some more clarity around the actual changes that will be made. So I think the way in which Mr. Green has described monitoring the impact for our financial position, I mean, that probably is the key for us as an organisation. So that's appropriate for the time being, but as new information comes forward, we can do exactly the same process as we've done for the risks that are already articulated and score them according to what we anticipate the impact will be.
Councillor Hastie.
Thank you. I've just got a quick point on the next steps on page 42, where you're hoping to develop a training programme. So you'll be looking to develop a training session for managers and officers. I think it'd be quite helpful to also include members in that session as well.
Yeah, absolutely, and it would include members. I just didn't put it in there, but we already do briefings for AGS, for instance, but we certainly would be looking to do that for members as well. So apologies, that wasn't in there.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you. Two questions. The first is on page 48. It mentions GDPR. That date is fast approaching us on the 25th of May. It mentions under controls plan that there'll be a new e-learning module for staff and for members. Have we got any confirmation about when that will happen? We've not got long left, and I don't think any of us have had any more information on it since about maybe January, February time. Or anything further be coming to us on that? And the second question is, again on page 48, it mentions about business rates and the downturn in the high street. Could we just have some reassurance that we are aware of this as an issue, given that we've had about 10 shops say they might be closing in Maidstone over the coming months, that we're aware of that and we're taking the appropriate controls to make sure that we can react to that as appropriate?
Who wishes to respond? Yes. Is there a chair there for you somewhere?
In regards to the e-learning for members, the LGA, you may remember that the LGA were developing that. Apparently it is still being developed. We have gone back and specifically chased them, not just ourselves, but I know other authorities have chased them as well, and they're not being very forthcoming with information on that. However, we do have our own internal one, which is being developed, and I believe that is going to be open to members as well as officers via our e-learning, which members already have access to. So I will identify with the learning and development team the exact date of that, because I can't remember it off the top of my head. It is in our plan, and I'll come back with an update for you if that's all right, and to all members.
Are you happy with that? Right.
Well, one of my points has been asked already, which was about including councillors in the training. But going back to the Brexit point, which Councillor Blackmore raised, I do think is actually something which is going to be very important to us, and potentially quite soon. I mean, the outlines of how a Brexit are going to go presumably are going to be clear by October, September, because that's when the EU is supposed to start the ratification process. On page 44 in this risk register, we do have an item on staffing, and I noticed there's no reference. I mean, that would be a classic place to reference Brexit, because for the authority, one of the biggest potential risks is what happens with our workforce in terms of how European citizens and European workers react in terms of Brexit and how they feel their situation's going to be. And we could suddenly find that we potentially either can't recruit people, or we actually find quite a lot of our workforce were to leave over a relatively short period. Now, we don't know which way Brexit's going to go, but I think there's got to be a risk to an authority which carries out the range of services we do. And I would have thought there should be a reference to that, specifically in terms of Brexit, if not a general risk, as was suggested. And I'm not saying, I heard of what you said earlier, but it is potentially one of the biggest risks we could be facing as a council coming up. And it's not necessarily that far off.
I'll bring Mrs. Broom in to answer that particular question. And then I've just realised we didn't actually get the second question from Councillor Harvey answered. So I believe Mr. Cornell, we will come and do that.
Just on the issue of does Brexit give us significant concern over our workforce? When the referendum result first occurred, we did an analysis of our workforce to see indeed whether or not there would be any particularly significant issues. And we did it for two reasons. One, to see whether or not our workforce had a significant component of people from the European Union. And secondly, we wanted to be able to reassure those people that as an employer, we wouldn't have a knee-jerk reaction. And the upshot of that was that we actually have very few people, which may be surprising to some. I do think, though, in terms of the general point, and just to echo some of the things that Councillor Blackmore was saying, some of the employers in Maidstone, it is a very significant issue, and despite the fact that we don't have clarity, people are responding. So we know there are risks to some parts of the economy here and for the health service. It's important that we work with those organisations, but I don't think it's something that should appear directly on our own risk register for the reasons that I've just explained.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Just returning to the matter of the retail sector, obviously we're always vigilant in terms of what the sort of sentiments are and so on, but over the last few months, obviously there's been a lot of sort of negative press and concern in the retail and leisure sectors. It's always sort of business as usual anyway, doing our best to support, promote this area of work within Maidstone. My colleague Dawn does a lot of work on this in particular in terms of her role with the Maidstone Town Centre Strategic Advisory Board. We're investing as a council in the public realm improvements for the town centre, which obviously supports retailing. We've got a paper later on this evening about the prospects of a business improvement district, promotional campaign, the opportunity area sites that we're exploring, and also as part of our sort of stakeholder management, we do meet regularly with the owners of the two large shopping centres, Fremlin Walk and Capital and Regional. So we're as close to it as we can be, but obviously it's an area of concern at the moment.
Councillor Harper, are you content?
Yes, for now.
No, I thought you'd indicate that are you content? But on both
I
questions.
accept what's been said. I'm slightly sceptical, but there's nothing wrong with being sceptical.
Thank you. based on our conversation around residents and customers in the first item, this particular item on the risk register doesn't mention them at all. Could a knock-on effect of this be that we don't attract enough customers or residents or visitors into the town centre? It mentions a lot about business rates and the impact it will have on businesses. Do we need to perhaps factor in here somewhere the impact it could have on our residents or our customers, and we don't draw them in, and that has even more of a negative effect than perhaps that of which we already expect here?
In the next iteration, this is a new risk, so we can perhaps incorporate some wording to better reflect those sentiments, if that would help.
Councillor Gooch, you've been very patient, and I still have Councillor Garland and Councillor Perry.
I thought I was waiting. I'm so kind, I was going to wait. Thank you, Chairman. I just think this paper is absolutely the right thing that we should be having. So much work goes into it. Thank you very much. This is vital to the way we run our business, basically. And if we haven't got this, then we shouldn't be doing the job we're doing. And that applies to just about everybody. Just a couple of comments, please. On page 42, I think it was, there's a paragraph there where you say that you've recently procured an audit management system and risk management tools, and I thought, oh my goodness, in come the robots. I'm very nervous about this kind of thing, because with risk you need NOS, you need sensitivity, you need foresight, you need anticipation, and those are things that the mechanical things don't have. So can you just reassure me that this is purely I don't know, just reassure me on that point, can you? My other point, which is hopefully quite easy for you to clarify, please, is on page 45. We were supposed to be having the cybersecurity software introduced in the first quarter, which where are we? Where are we? January to... We're in quarter 4, aren't we?
No, quarter 1.
Oh, quarter 1 of the first... Anyway, can you confirm for me whether or not we're on target? I've lost my sense of timing now. I don't know where we are, but I just want to make sure that we've got that safeguard in place, please. On page 45, that was. Thank you.
Thanks very much. In terms of reassurance, the system is purely around making the mechanics and the administration of the risk management process a bit smarter, not replacing judgment around risk itself and risk assessments. I'm an auditor, so you can expect at the moment everything's on spreadsheets. This is a way of putting it into a system that means collating this type of information will be more efficient, but the types of insights we'll get from the system will be a lot smarter than what's in my head, but not replacing judgment at all. And the second one relating to the system security, it's quarter 1, which is actually April, May, June. But we'll be following that up as part of the monthly updates on these risks. So I can come back to you on that in terms of specific dates, but it will be sometime between now and June.
Councillor Garland.
Yeah, I just want to make a quick point about Brexit. There are equally a number of people who think it will be a positive. So I think for the council to formalise a risk in the sense of Brexit would be the wrong thing to do, because there will be plenty of people who think it is a positive impact on UK. Whether that will transpire or not, we'll have to wait and see. But I think in terms of the risk register, I think the approach that the Chief Executive and Mark Green are taking is the right one, and that we should not formalise a perceived risk, whether there is one or not. I think there probably is, but I don't think it should be formalised in a strategic document such as the risk register. Should inform policy, but beyond that, shouldn't be in the risk register.
Thank you, Councillor Garland. Councillor Perry.
Brexit is an exciting subject. I totally agree with Councillor Garland, actually. He's absolutely right. And I think Councillor Blackwell was right to raise this, just as a reference, nothing more, nothing less. I think that's absolutely spot on. But we don't, I mean, I do have quite a big experience of dealing with the European Commission. We haven't got a clue what the final result will be, so I don't know how we can assess a risk when we don't actually know what the outcome is going to be at all. And as Councillor Garland quite rightly said, it could be positive, it might be the other way, we just don't know. And given that we've got to also deal with the European Commission, 27 other member states, plus the European Parliament, there's a long way to go still yet. And I was listening to Guy Verhofstadt on the radio this morning, and was quite interesting what he said about where we are at the moment. But I don't see how we can assess something when we don't know what the outcome is. So I think we should just refer to it and stick there, because, as I say, it could be positive, it could be negative, we just don't know at this stage. Thank you.
I'm so tempted to ask Mr Green to put Brexit on the future agenda. I'm going to refrain, but because of the way it's enlivened everybody, the mention of Brexit, suddenly people have sat up, and it's amazing. So, but I will refrain from doing so. Councillor Harwood, you've been very patient, you're next.
Thank you, Chairman. We've got to survive until 2019 first, which is a challenge enough. I think that the strategy correctly separates business continuity and emergency planning from corporate risk. However, I think the point around Brexit, to a certain extent, around external factors is well made, because, joking apart, things like terrorism and war and flooding and pandemic is very difficult to staff a council if everybody's come down with flu, or there's some of those external issues. So it may be worth considering another column looking at external threat and risk, and just so that you get that interface with emergency planning and business continuity, and how that impacts upon the business of the council. Because, I mean, to all intents and purposes, an event like the Grenfell Tower event was not the council's event. It was a fire in a housing provider property, but it had a very profound and significant impact upon the operation of that local authority into the long term. And we are quite kind of threat-rich in terms of severe weather impacts and flooding and so on. And I think we do need to understand how that can impact upon the council. Thank you.
Mrs Brim, do you want to respond to that, or no? To help us.
I was only going to say one thing, just in terms of how our updates to you have evolved over the time to come to kind of the format they are now, and based on comments back, but it's always something that we're trying to advance and make clearer. So certainly a narrative around the context and those environmental factors, or external factors, sorry, is something we can feature in the next report as a preface to the next update that we give.
Councillor Harwood, does that satisfy you? Yes? Okay. Councillor Harvey, you did just indicate, and then I'm going to go to the vote. So you indicate, you indicated that, nobody's actually moved it yet.
That's what I'm doing. I propose the item on the paper.
You'll find the recommendation on page 31. And it just says discussed and noted. Oh, did you indicate? I'm very sorry, I didn't have you on my list. I apologise. Please have your say.
I thought I could talk loud enough. As you may expect, I'm going to page 46, which has got all the housing on it. There's 3 sentences on there, one that gives me a cause for concern and 2 that don't. The one that gives me a bit of call for concern is the bit that says closer working with the housing association sector, and in particular Golding Homes. Now, Golding Homes isn't the only housing provider in Maidstone Borough Council, and as other councillors may have come across, they're beginning to go a bit low in esteem with a lot of our residents. If we're just going to concentrate on Golding Homes, I don't think that's a very good thing. I think we should be looking a lot wider than just Golding Homes, who are not building any rented, affordable homes.
That's my cause for concern. The other two I've got is on the third section here, the possibility of the council investing prudential borrowing monies into a JV with a housing association partner. The quicker we do that, the better. Our current waiting list, as at the start of this week, was 773. That's not going to go down in any way at all unless we start building or getting some rented accommodation. In my ward, such as Shetway South, probably the poorest ward in the borough, most of those residents are never going to be able to own their own home. They're going to rely on rented accommodation. Some of them have got quite a lot of children, so what happens to them in a few years when they get older? So the sooner that happens, the better. My final one, which actually brought a smile to my face, is report to CLT to recommend the implementation of an in-house housing management team. Now, that's what I used to be back in the 80s and 90s at Maidstone Borough Council. And I think this is a brilliant idea because to handle something like this, you need a specialised team working on it all the time. So again, the sooner something like this comes into being, the happier I'll be. Thank you.
Mr. Corner?
Yes, thank you. In terms of closer working with the housing association sector, we reference Golding Homes purely because they're the major stockholder, but we do obviously have other developing housing associations operating in Maidstone, and we do, run a programme of sort of high-level stakeholder engagement with them, the likes of Orbit, Clarion, West Kent, Town and Country, Moat, Hyde, and so on. So that, please be assured that work does happen. In terms of the JV possibility at this committee, 4 weeks ago we got the funding approved to take forward that idea to the next stage. So that work is now underway, and I've sort of been progressing meetings on that front. And also, in terms of the in-house housing management team, obviously this is just in relation to our own growing portfolio of stock for the temporary accommodation that we've acquired. So it's small, but I think it will deliver a much better service to the residents of those homes. That's okay.
Thank you. Are you satisfied, or do you wish to come back? Sorry. Are you satisfied, or do you wish to come back? Yes. All right.
Could I just add?
Yes, please do.
The reference here, this report was published in advance of the consideration of the proposals, and those have come forward. And because we are working within budget, but simply changing our operational arrangements, we have agreed those new arrangements, and we'll be putting them in place as soon as we possibly can.
Right. Well, this report has been well and truly discussed, I think. Nobody else is indicating to speak. So is it noted, members? Noted? Thank you. Members, I'm afraid I'm going to call a 5-minute break. I've got other people saying yes, please. Shall we make it 10 minutes then? Because I think the last two items are quite meaty. So it's 5:02. Could you be back at 5 past, please? Members, officers, will you take your seats, please? Mrs. Hard, I suggest you come up, please. Mrs. Hard, you can actually have another 5-10 minutes if you wish. I've got ahead of myself. It's the KPIs first. Shall we talk your water out? Oh, yes, please. Right, members, we're on agenda item 13, key performance indicators. Mrs. Collier.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and good evening, members. This report presents the proposed key performance indicators, or KPIs, and targets for the period 2018-19. As you will remember, members requested in March that I return with a report with the performance for quarter 1 to 3 included, which I have and is at Appendix 1. KPIs monitor the Council's progress delivering against the priorities as set out in the strategic plan. In December 2016, the committee decided that they would concentrate on 3 action areas which prioritised in the refreshed strategic plan for 2017-18, which is providing a clean and safe environment, which is now with the addition of green, regenerating the town centre and a home for everyone. Following a decision to make no significant changes to the strategic plan for 2018-19, and given the substantial work by members and officers of the refresh back in 2017, which included an in-depth review of the KPIs, the indicators at Appendix 1 have not been substantially revised, which I think offers good continuity. The targets were reviewed by heads of service, and they considered this year's and previous year's performance, seasonality, and the current and future environment in which the services are operating, including the resources available. Members are asked to agree the draft set of indicators and targets for officers to monitor for the period of 2018-19, and I'm happy to take any questions from the committee, and heads of service, directors and chief executive are here for any further specific questions.
Councillor Blackmore.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I know this is only a draft, and it's possible I've missed it, but on page 4 in the minutes, under minute 191, which refers to the KPIs at the last meeting, we have got an additional one that was to be included, which was the percentage of fly tips cleared within 4 working days. But that doesn't appear on this list. Is there any reason why it doesn't, even though it's listed in the minutes?
Possibly an oversight by me, but as the report was asked to come back, I didn't include it because I didn't think it was voted on, but I might have got that wrong, and I apologise if I did.
Well, if I may say, it is in minute 191. The voting intentions are there, and it looks to me as if it's been passed. 7 for, 2 against, and 5 abstentions. So, could it be included, please?
Can we just get that inserted?
Yes, sorry. I'm sorry for the oversight. That was just a misunderstanding on my part.
Councillor Harvey.
Can I just ask for clarification on page 57, where the figure for processing of minor planning applications has gone down? The notes just say it's been lowered to reflect performance. Can we just have some assurance that measures are in place to make sure that that doesn't go much lower and that's been adequately controlled, please?
Yes, thank you. The reason for the lower target is the performance against these KPIs dipped over the last 6 months of the last financial year. The reason for that was we were going through a process of clearing a large backlog of applications that dated back over a 3-year period. So as they were cleared, they were being determined, and they were being determined out of date. When we started that exercise, we had, I believe, close to 250 applications outside of their statutory determination period, and we brought that figure down now to very close to 50. So huge amounts of progress has been made. We're now into the new financial year, and we do monitor the performance against these three things on a weekly basis. And I am pleased to say that things are looking very, very positive at the moment, with performance at 100% for both majors and minors, and 95% for others. So I think performance is going to be looking pretty good as we go through this new financial year. But so we could almost question the need for the lower target, really. I think that was probably a little bit risk-averse in lowering it. But
Councillor Ball.
Excuse me. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. I'm very happy to propose the recommendations as on the paper. I have one question, which is just, it's not going to change my mind, but I think it'd be useful to thrash this out while we're here. And that is the percentage of fly tips with evidential value which results in enforcement action. Obviously, we've had varying sort of results over the last, over the 3 quarters, and the target has gone from 20% to 50%. I remember, not this committee, I think it was at Heritage Committee a couple of months ago when a similar report came, and it was noted that night that a few of the targets were off, basically. You'll probably remember it yourself, Madam Chair. So this is quite important to get right. And so with that in mind, I'm just curious more than anything to, obviously, I can understand where 50% has come from for the target for this coming year, but it's still less than obviously what was achieved in quarter 2 and quarter 3. And I just wonder whether we could be slightly more ambitious in that sense. But that's not a deal breaker for me, and I'm happy to propose recommendations nonetheless.
Did you just want to comment on that, Mrs. Shepherd?
Yes, I can come back on that one. So obviously we're in the process at the moment of recruiting 3 more officers to carry out the sort of investigations into waste crime and particularly fly tipping. So the view was, whilst we've achieved sort of very high figures, far beyond our expectations, you could see what we set as our target for this previous year. We wanted to allow the time for those officers to sort of be integrated into that team and to really start work on the investigations and delivering the outcomes. Therefore, if we set the stretch target, you know, I think I said at the Communities Housing and Environment Committee that I'd hope to be at 60, 65 for the last 2 quarters of this coming year, but to achieve that throughout the whole year is quite an ambitious target. So therefore, the 50 would reflect the progress over the whole year, but I would expect to see that rising throughout the year, so we set a more ambitious target next year.
Councillor Borton, I've just had it pointed out to me, and it's true, that we're a little bit woolly on the recommendation. It should actually have included in it that the key performance indicators contained in Appendix 1 are agreed. Are you happy for that wording? Yes. So could I have those in favour, please? Are you? Yes, Captain. That's unanimous. That's unanimous. That's unanimous, members. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Collier. Mrs. Hudd, do you think you could go there so that... I'm sorry to sound like a Sergeant Major, but I like to be able to see people, otherwise I miss it. Members, we're moving to agenda item 14, which is the Maidstone Town Centre Business Improvement District, pages 59 to 69. Mrs. Hutt, sorry, did you want? Sorry, Mr. Cornell's going to start us off.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chairman. This report provides an update on One Maidstone's plans to create a business improvement district, a BID, and seeks confirmation of the Council's support for the BID in terms of casting the Council's votes. By way of background, 20 years ago, Maidstone Town Centre Management Limited was formed working at the forefront of improving the town centre on behalf of businesses. From this organisation, in 2014, One Maidstone was created. In order for them to further their aims and objectives, they have decided to pursue a bid, primarily because businesses prefer to financially support organisations with bid governance in place, i.e. many national retailers have a bid-only policy in terms of financially supporting town centre management companies. So to recap, a bid is a defined levy in which a levy is a defined area in which a levy is charged on all business rates payers in addition to the business rates bill. It is business-led and business-funded body formed to improve a defined commercial area. And the benefits can include businesses deciding and directing how money is spent in the area, and that the money is raised are ring-fenced for the said area. One Maidstone have commissioned a company, CMS, a specialist consultancy, to develop their bid proposal, and through consultation with local businesses, the following themes have emerged, which is to manage, discover and promote. The overarching vision is managing and promoting the discovery of Maidstone, proud and dynamic county town of Kent. The proposal is for a 1.5% levy rate to all businesses within the bid area with a rateable value of 15k and above, reducing to 1% for those businesses within Fremlin's Walk, the Mall and the Royal Star Arcade, because they obviously pay into a service charge for their immediate locality. So this will generate an income to the bid company of £2,150,000 approximately over the 5-year lifespan of the bid, and it will encompass around 470 businesses. Maidstone has 15 properties within the bid levy area and therefore will have 15 votes. The rateable value of those properties is £1,565,500 per annum, so the levy payable by Maidstone will be £23,483.50 per annum. Maidstone would have 2 seats on the bid board, 1 officer, 1 member. And just as an aside, bid organisations and opportunities aren't restricted to town centre areas. They can be appropriate for other employment districts as well, industrial sites and so on. So there could be other opportunities elsewhere within the borough, but it's the town centre we're here to discuss this evening. Thank you.
Mrs Hudd, I believe you have to declare an interest.
I do. Make a disclosure, please, that I'm actually on the board of One Maidstone Community Interest Company, which is the proposer for the bid. But I've come along to answer questions, as obviously I'm very close to what's going on.
Councillor Garland, you were first.
Thank you, Chairman. Ordinarily, this would appeal to my instincts to promote businesses within the borough of Maidstone, particularly the town centre as well, where we have a large concentration of businesses. However, I can't in its current format. I'll explain why. We are constantly reading that the High Street generally, and Maidstone in particular, is weak in terms of trade. And we have an awful lot of independent traders who have low margins. To impose a levy of 1.5% on them, I think would be an onerous burden on particularly the independent traders who have small margins in the current times. The High Street is changing. Digital revolution has altered the way and continues to alter the way in which we shop. And therefore, as a result of that, there is a lot less trade going on in the high streets than there may have been 10, 15, 20 years ago when the first bid was proposed by this council, which I supported. However, I can support this if there are a number of changes made to it, particularly in terms of the ballot, because we're not saying that a bid should be taking place and therefore it would. We are simply proposing a ballot. However, I think the margin for success of 1% above 50% is too low, because even if you achieve 51% in the rules set out here, that would mean it would be successful. But 49% of those businesses would have voted against it. And I would wager that the majority of those would vote against it purely because their margins do not support another levy of 1.5% on business rates. Therefore, I would propose that the margin for success is moved from 50% to maybe 75%. I could accept 66%. That way would be assured that a true majority of businesses do actually support it, and therefore we could, as a council, also support it. In addition to that, I would also propose that the council does not participate in the vote. It has 15 votes. I would recommend that we do not exercise those votes in the ballot itself. And the reason for that is if the margin is such that those additional 15 votes were to push it one way or the other, I think the council would be having undue influence on the final outcome. And the only reason I put those particular proposals forward is because in the current climate, an additional 1.5% levy on businesses, particularly those with the smaller margins, as I referred to, and they would have to pay it if it was successful at 51%, could put more businesses out of business in Maidstone itself. To back that argument up, there was a very interesting programme. I didn't know there was a bid development coming forward. There was a very interesting programme some weeks ago, an hour long, about bid districts. Very few callers who are independent traders actually supported the bid districts that were, in effect, imposed upon them by that particular margin. So whilst in principle I would support a bid district because of the benefits it would bring, I think in the current climate the two proposals that I outline would be more acceptable than the ones that are currently on the paper. So therefore, just to reiterate, I propose a higher margin for success in the vote in order to protect those independent traders that may not be able to afford or cannot sustain over a 5-year period a 1.5% levy. And secondly, the council does not exercise its 15 votes and simply supports the bid, but steps back from the vote itself to ensure that only private sector businesses actually influence the final outcome.
Councillor Garland, I'm going to ask Mr Cornell and Mrs Hudd to come back. I think there's a slight misunderstanding because it is not Maidstone Borough Council that is actually doing this. We are not actually... Yes.
Let me just clarify. I'm aware of that, but the proposals on the paper are very specific, and that anything above 50% is a yes, and we would exercise our 15 votes. So the fact it is coming from one Maidstone, I accept that, but you're asking on the papers for us as a council to support that bid with those criteria in place. And my beef is not with the bid per se, but with the climate, coupled with those proposals in the current papers that we're being asked to vote upon.
Mr Cornell first.
Yes, thank you. Just in terms of the effect on smaller businesses with thinner profit margins, there is a provision in there, so those with a rateable value of less than 15,000 per annum wouldn't pay the levy. So that is, the intention is there within the structure of the bid to address that particular concern. I'm not saying it meets your objectives fully, but it's just to draw your attention to it.
Excuse me, I must interject here because I accept the point you're making, Mr Cornell, but the rateable value is not an indication of the success of the business itself. What is important is their ability to produce a margin, therefore a profit. If you are voting, you're not voting on your rateable value. You are voting on whether you think the bid itself can enhance your business itself as an individual trader. There are many traders out there who would not be able to support a 1.5% levy or would find it very difficult to trade with another 1.5% levy imposed upon them. The outcome last time was against a bid proposal. It wasn't successful. I suspect the bid this time may go a different way. But I think in order to protect the independent traders with lower margins than the likes of M&S or whoever, I think the threshold for success should be higher than 50%. I propose 75%. You might propose 2/3. I would accept that. But I think the success threshold should be higher and that we do not vote.
I'm going to call in Mrs. Hudd because obviously sitting on the board, she can tell you as much as she can, what the situation is. Bear in mind that One Maidstone has been going out talking to all these businesses. So, Mrs. Hudd.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. There's a number of issues that are raised, so I'll take them in order, and please let me know if I've missed any of them. Maidstone isn't weak in trading. We're actually doing quite well compared to generally around the country. Our vacancy rates are around average. We're not suffering as many other town centres are. We're not a failing town centre by any means. Yeah, okay. Okay, so.
The average will be higher because town centres are suffering as a result of the change in the weather shock.
Okay.
So that average will be higher now than it was 10 or 15 years ago.
Mr Cornell's already mentioned that most of the independent traders in the smaller shops will be excluded from the levy because of the £15,000 lower limit. The percentage, there's two measures for a bid to be successful. One is that 51% of the people who vote have to vote yes, and that 51% have to represent 51% or more of the rateable value. And those two measures are to protect so that the smaller businesses or the larger businesses can't skew the vote. Those measures are set down in the legislation for bids. We cannot change that. That is set out in the government legislation of how bids are operated and run. So we can't change those 51% measures. That is not something that we have any control over. I think One Maidstone are absolutely relying on the support of both Maidstone Borough Council and Kent County Council for this. We would both be, KCC and NBC would be the biggest levy payers in this, helping to leverage in over £2 million of investment into the Sound Centre over the 5 years. As Chairman's already said, this is a One Maidstone proposal. We have been talking to businesses now for over a year. We're getting a very positive response back, and the people that were in the no camp last time round that are still in the town centre are mainly on side now with this. We have there's no campaign. There's no one mobilising against it. We've done a huge amount of engagement on one-to-one basis with all the traders. They've had visits on a number of occasions. They've had leaflets. We've had consultation events that some of our own councillors have attended. We had a representative from each of the parties that came to those. So there's a very positive atmosphere in the town centre about this. And I would be very concerned if the council did not demonstrate its support for it by voting in favour of the bid. I think it would send out a completely wrong message about what we're trying to do in our town centre.
Councillor Blackmore.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Gosh, what a load of negativity there is in this room. How disappointing. There are a couple of questions I've got for you. Essentially, I actually think this is a very solid idea. And if it is actually business-led and led by a large spectrum of businesses, then I think it makes an awful lot of sense. If it's just led by one or two major players and we are part of it, then I think that's wrong. But if there's a cross-spectrum, then I think, as Mrs Hudd has said, there's a lot of support. There isn't a no campaign. I think that's incredibly positive. You mentioned that there were 470. 470. How many actually responded? Because I get the impression that people have been spoken to. But do we have an idea of where the figures are actually going? Who's looking to say yes? Who's looking to say no? Personally, I think the Borough Council should be behind this. I mean, it looks as if our contribution will be approximately £20,000. If that helps to leverage in other investment for the town, then surely that has to be a good thing, regardless of whether people think that town centres are dying. Surely this is the sort of thing we should be supporting in order to make sure that the town centre doesn't die and continues to go on. So I think we need some positive vibes rather than negative vibes. I accept your point that you have protected, or the smaller businesses will be protected. But can you give us an idea of what sort of size of business, or an example of a business that is able to vote, and an example of someone who isn't? Because you did mention the skewing. So does that mean that some of the people who have a larger presence, would they get more than one vote because, I don't know, they have 2 or 3 units in Fremlin Walk? Is that how it works? So if you take House of Fraser, and other department stores are available, must clarify that, do they have, let's say, 7 votes because of their size and others have 1? If you could give us an idea of how it works, that would be helpful. Oh.
Thank you. The board, just start with each point. The board membership is very broad. We have a shadow board at the moment, and the main board for One Maidstone has about, I think, 14 businesses on, and we have someone from each area of the geographic area of the town, and also from the different sectors, so retail, nighttime economy, service sector, restaurants. So we have tried to keep it as broad as possible, that every area of the town is represented, and that each area of the town has a spokesperson on the board. So, for example, we have somebody who's at the upper end of Week Street who's on the board, and that person talks to everybody in that area and spreads the word about the board and brings back the local intelligence from that area. And that will be continued with the new bid board once that's established. For the first year, people will be invited onto the board relevant to their skill set and the area that they represent. It's proposed that from year 2, people are asked to propose directors for the board once the bid's established. We have an absolute detailed spreadsheet of all the people who are liable to vote, eligible to vote. And so we know exactly who we've spoken to, we know who's a yes, who's a maybe yes, who's a maybe no, and who's a definite no. We are working on that, and there's a huge amount of work ongoing at the moment, and that will continue up until the end of May, when the final business plan is produced with the notification of ballots to the businesses. And we will only progress to that stage if we are happy that we have got a good chance of winning the vote. We won't go for the vote if we don't think we're going to get it. On your final point about how many votes do people get, you get a vote for each hereditament. So each premise that you have the business rates bill for, hence we've got 15 votes because the council has 15 properties within the town centre that it pays business rates on. I believe House of Fraser, other stores are available, have 1 vote because they've got 1 premise in Fremlin Walk. So it doesn't matter the size of the vote. The next biggest voter after us is KCC. I think they have 6 properties within the bid area, and their contribution would actually be larger than ours. And I think it's, as I said earlier, it's really important that Maidstone Borough Council show support for this, because if we don't, I doubt very much whether Kent County Council would support it and the bid would fail.
Yeah, just one point on your question there. In terms of the example of House of Fraser, whilst they'd only get 1 vote for 1 retail unit, that they got the second threshold to be cleared in terms of the overall share of rateable value, you see. So they would have a lot of influence through that hurdle that needs to be cleared.
Sorry, Madam Chair, can I just come back on something? So if this is driven by One Maidstone and just refresh my memory on this, we only have a supporting role on that. Is that correct?
So, yes, myself and Councillor Clive English are both directors on One Maidstone CIC, but we're 2 of 12, or I'm not sure of the exact figures, at least a dozen people on that board. So we get a vote on that board as this project's been progressing, as do the other private sector reps. But we are the only public sector people on there. It is totally private sector driven. The chair is Andy Davey from the MAL. The vice chair is Lloyd Wright from Fenelon Walk. And we have some of the other major retailers, but we also have independents on there. And I did miss one of your questions that I've just picked up about an example of who would pay and who wouldn't pay. So, for example, Union Street, the first half of Union Street is included in the bid area at the moment. Most of those businesses down there won't have to pay anything, but they will benefit greatly from the £2.3 million that will get invested in the town centre.
Unpack once more, Councillor Blackman.
Yeah, if I may. Where did this emanate from? I mean, I know it came from One Maidstone, but was there one person within that sort of unit who was the main driver behind it?
It came from when One Maidstone was set up and they set out their business plan. It's always been a core ambition from their business plan to become a bid, because if One Maidstone doesn't get the bid vote and become a bid company this year, it will fail. It's not sustainable. The businesses, as described by Mr Cornell in his introduction, no longer want to pay into a town centre management organisation that's mostly just an independent group of people who share an ambition. They want a framework with a proper business plan where they know how their money is going to be spent, and so that they can see the return on the investment that they're making.
Councillor Cox, you in.
Thank you very much. A lot has been said, and I think the positive line is the way to go. I'm encouraged by the fact that much of our borough will obviously benefit because people come into the town to trade, to shop. And I think the areas that you're mentioning, interestingly enough, so it goes halfway up Union Street, but by just a map it cuts off. So some people are included, but I think a lot more people will benefit, it sounds like. My business, which is outside Maidstone, I am below the threshold. But do they have an input if they're below the threshold? That was a question, and if I can have an answer to that, I'll come back.
So, yes, everyone within the bid area will be, whether they levy pay or not, will have an influence on the business plan as it's being developed. And you're quite right, there are businesses that are not in the defined area that will benefit from them. And some of those have already indicated that they will be voluntary levy payers because they absolutely see the benefit of doing this and the benefits it will bring to their business.
That sounds very encouraging. I certainly hadn't really given it the thought as Councillor Garland had. And after hearing that we can't really affect this threshold of 51% of the vote, I don't really see, other than what's been spoken about, anything that should stand in our way, and I would like to propose as on papers, please.
Who's seconding that, Councillor Blackmore?
Can I make a counter-proposal, Madam Chair?
Hang on a minute. I was just going to come to you, Councillor Garland, and I will just say, so that I have captured everybody, because I don't want to miss somebody again, I also have Councillor Gooch, Councillor Harper and Councillor Harvey also indicating still to speak. Come back, please, then, if you wish to do a counter-proposal.
I'd like to propose that we agree to points 1... where's my bloody paper? There we go. I'd like to propose that we agree to point 1, because I accept the fact we can't influence the threshold, point 3 and point 4, but we delete point 2. The reason for being for that is I think the private sector should influence the vote 100%, not the public.
Right, have you got that? Does anybody wish to speak on that? You wish to speak on that?
Yes, please. As I've just been briefed by Dawn, if we were to be removed as 15 votes, how many votes would KCC? Because obviously if we're saying we shouldn't have the vote, KCC have only got 6, yes? That's 21, yeah, 21 out of a total of how many eligible? 470. Yeah, I can see what Councillor Garland is saying, but I hope that people would see that we don't have a significant amount of votes, but we must partake and say where our amount of the input to the bid goes. We must have a voice, and I think our voice is on behalf of the residents as well, in a sense. So, no, I wouldn't be able to support that.
Wanted to come back?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to clarify that if we didn't vote and KCC didn't vote, it would fail because of the rateable values of the properties that we have, and you have to meet both measures.
Members, I'm going to take that to the vote. Those in favour of the amendment... Nobody else? Are you saying you don't understand this and you want some clarification?
Well, we're being told we can't have the amendment. Being told technically that we can't have the amendment.
You can have the amendment, but you've been told what the consequences would be.
Well, it's a pointless amendment, and I'll withdraw it.
Thank you. Members, then I have Councillor Gooch.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just have points of clarification, please? On page 61, paragraph 1.9, I understand that the Borough Council will be operating, collecting the money in. Will we therefore be responsible for any bad payers, and would we be doing any chasing up? I'm just looking at the minutiae on that. I'll give you the list of questions. I've got a few. Paragraph 1.12. I didn't quite get the percentage of businesses who are not interested. And finally, my question was about the amount that we paid, because we already pay in something. Would that equate to what we will have to, the fee we'll have to pay in future? I'm not quite sure of our net cost. Thank you.
Mrs. Hart?
If I take the first two and then Mr Green will take the bit on the finances. For 1.9, the bid operating agreement, so the levy will be billed and collected by our business rates team, as we do, and a charge is made back to the bid to cover the costs of doing that. So it's fully recoverable and it's in the bid business plan, so we're not doing that for free. It's standard practice that the council recovers its costs, and the bid have based their business plan on the recovery rate that the council has for its business rates generally. So that's the first point. The second point, I'm not sure I was understood, it's percentage of businesses not interested. I mean, there's some people are just not interested. You talk to them and they don't want to talk about it one way or the other or give an opinion. Their final decision will be seen through the ballot. But there's huge engagement, and people are very interested, generally are interested in it and want to know more about it. You do have to keep going back to them, because even though you put things through their door and you go in and see them, often there's a statistic that you have to go in 7 times. I'm not sure if that's true, but some people have said that's the same with marketing. You have to do it 7 times. And I'll let Mr Green come back on the financial aspect.
By the financial aspect, I think it's actually been covered by Mrs Hudd in that the operating agreement sets out the fact that we're collecting the debts, but if the money isn't collected, that's just a shortfall for the bid. There's no financial loss for the council.
Councillor Harper. Mr. Whip. Oh, hang on a second, Mr. Green.
Yes, apologies. The other part of the question was about whether we can offset what we currently pay to One Maidstone against the 20,000, and the answer is yes, we can. So although we'd be paying 20,000, we would be saving 15,000 that we currently pay to One Maidstone.
Right, Councillor Harper.
Right, I think this, as has been said, is an excellent idea. I just wonder if there's also possibilities elsewhere in the borough to potentially look at smaller things in other environments. So perhaps looking at, I don't know, the 2020 estate and Parkwood industrial estates, whether there's a similar thing to a bid process for sort of industrial or commercial areas which could be looked at, and whether any of our other economic areas like Head Corner or anywhere else might benefit from a similar thing but on a smaller scale. Because if we can lever in money into the borough to help regeneration across the whole of the area, then perhaps that's something we should be looking at.
Mrs. Hudd?
Yeah, it's an absolutely excellent idea, and we're already talking to the owners of 2020 about the potential to have a bid on there. They've got particular issues around lorry drivers parking, security, lighting and safety, and we think that a bid would be a very good way of them solving some of those problems. I actually did a commercial industrial estate bid when I worked in Canterbury with one of our estates. I'm familiar with how they work. And I think, yes, you know, I think places like Marden are places that we could look for a bid. They've got enough critical mass of business there to make it worthwhile, that you have to have a critical mass to make the cost of running the bid and collecting the levy worthwhile for the actual amount of money you get in the end. But we're happy to talk to any area that thinks this is something that would be a good thing for them to do.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you. If we're saying we're only going to go to the vote if we think we can win, are we not therefore setting an example that we're rigging the election in our favour, so to speak? I mean, I assume it's because it's a cost factor, but what kind of example do we set if we're saying we're not going to take this any further, if we think we're going to lose? Surely we should set an example and say, you know, regardless of what's going to happen, we should go to the election, done all this work, we need to see it through to the end.
That's not our decision, it's the decision of One Maidstone board, and they will take a pragmatic decision if they don't believe that they've got enough support, then it would be not worthwhile to do it, apart from the cost, and it would have a very negative impact, I would think, if we got a no vote again.
Members, the recommendations on the papers on page 59 have been moved by Councillor Cox and seconded by Councillor Black. Yes, do you wish to add something?
No, I was just going to ask, can we take them separately, please?
Can indeed. Is that agreed, members? Is that agreed, members? Right. Okay, so we move to the vote on 1, to support the ballot for a bid as proposed by the bid organisation. Those in favour, please indicate. That's unanimous. Thank you. 2, to delegate authority to the Director of Regeneration and Place to cast the Council's 15 votes in favour of a bid in the ballot. Those in favour? Can't see Councillor Perry. Right, okay. Okay. And those against? And abstentions? 2 abstentions. Thank you. 3, to conduct the ballot on behalf of the bid organisation. Those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. And 4, if the bid is successful, to enter into an operating agreement and a baseline agreement with the bid organisation. Those in favour? And that's unanimous as well. Thank you, members. Thank you, Mrs. Hudd. You're welcome to stay or go as you choose. Members, we're now on to the last item, I think we are, which I've lost, which is the flipping heck. Which is the moat. Right, members, it is. Thank you, Councillor Harwood. Moat Park Lake Dam on pages 70 to 79. Members, I know it's the end of term, but we're not quite at the end of the lesson yet. Mr. Green.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Most members will now be familiar with the problem that we face with the Moat Park
Mr.
Lake
Green,
Dam.
I'm very sorry to interrupt, but I don't think people
Yes,
have...
sorry, let me just introduce Deborah Turner, who's an interim strategy property consultant who's been working with us and has been working specifically on this project. And between us, I hope Deborah and I will answer any questions that you may have. But I'll just finish introducing the report. Basically, as I say, the the problem that we have with Moat Park Lake Dam is that after an inspection under the Reservoirs Act regime, we've had to commit to the Environment Agency that we'll carry out measures at Moat Park Lake Dam to reduce the risk of water from the lake overtopping the dam. And whether we like it or not, we are obliged legally to carry out this work, and the Chief Executive has had to make a written commitment to the Environment Agency that will do so. And the work has to be carried out to a standard that will meet the criteria of a formally accredited reservoir engineer. So we've engaged Black & Veatch, who are experts in the field, and some members will recall a presentation that John Hopkins of Black & Veatch gave here in this room on 5th of March, and he described the various options and the issues involved. And Black & Veatch have now recommended their preferred solution, which is set out in the report. It's described as option C1, and if you look at page 73 of the report, in the diagram at the top of that page, C1 is shown there on the left-hand side. Basically what it means is reinforcing the dam at its western end. And this option is both the cheapest of the ones identified and the one with the least visual impact. But we are still talking about 1.66 million, Black & Veatch estimate, for the works to be carried out, and taking other costs into account, and also the fact that we're going to have to replace the sluice that goes between the lake and Turkey Mill. We're talking probably 2 million, and including contingency, possibly as much as 2.5 million ultimately. Now, obviously, we'll try and mitigate that by looking to carry out the work in the most cost-effective way, and to mitigate it by looking at other possible funding sources. But there is a heavy capital investment, of which 1.9 million has been provided for in the capital programme. Full details of the recommendations and all the rationale are set out in Black & Veatch's report, which has been published as background papers to the papers this evening. Basically, you're asked to approve the preferred option C1 and to give delegate authority for us as officers to go ahead with the work. And as I said at the beginning, Deborah and I will be happy to take any questions that you may have on the report.
Councillor Blackmore, you indicate.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My understanding, and I may be wrong, is that should anything happen and these works haven't been undertaken, then there is the possibility of significant loss of life, which presumably would leave the council with blood on its hands. So therefore, that means the works ought to be carried out as soon as possible, and in as, I don't know whether it's unobtrusive or inobtrusive, forgive me, it's that time of day. Anyway, so we can't see it too much, is what I'm trying to say. I think it's a fait accompli, so therefore I'd be very happy to propose the recommendations, because personally I don't think there's an alternative.
Actually, I had Councillor Cox first. The hand did go up first. But would you like to speak as well, Councillor Ring and Councillor Borden? No. Councillor Cox has seconded it. So, Councillor Cox, do you want to say something?
No.
Sorry? Apologies, Councillor Ring. You have every right to speak. Please speak. I'm afraid you're too late to second it, but we will note in the papers what you have said as the ward member. Right. I have Councillor Cox. You want to say something very quickly?
Yeah, thank you very much. I was unable to attend the briefing that was in here, but I did go to the site visit, and I think the site visit is a stark reality of what we're really faced with. However, I'm glad to see that you've got the work done to the sluice gates in this period, 18-19, because I think what we were being told was it would give us excessive cost over and above what we were looking at if we didn't have control of the sluices, because we're going to need to stop the water going the other way to have the work carried out. So you really can see what's before us, and I had not actually walked over that way. Obviously, I've been at Turkey Mill at the Mayor's garden party, and we all just gaze across the bit of lake there and look up and think, oh, isn't that lovely? Not really realising what's behind it, absolutely. I'm quite happy to second this, but I really do hope that we put this work completely in place at the sluice gates first. Thank you.
Councillor Barnett.
If I may, Madam Chair, I'd like to bring a little bit of light-heartedness, as this is our last meeting of this civic year. And I've got a proposal that will save you £2.5 million. I am in contact with a local beaver lodge, and they're quite happy to move in and sort out the dam for you, because they're very good at making dams.
Thank you. Councillor... Oh, it was Councillor Hastie.
Thank you. I just want to check that there's sufficient budget allocated to restore the trees and things that may be lost during the work. And also, I understand that to the western extent of the lake, it supports some uncommon wildlife, such as a colony of river snails. Are they going to be relocated?
In terms of allocation for tree replanting, so that's all part of the proposal underneath under the works. That's a substantial part of the ongoing sort of one maintenance programme, but also in terms of the implementation of the works. So the actual physical works will only probably, at the moment, estimate take 4 months, but then they've allowed a whole year's worth of planting and ongoing maintenance around the landscaping. In terms of the ecology, they're still undertaking additional. So we've done stage 1 so far of the works. Stage 2 involves some more ecology works, but anything that we need to do in terms of protecting habitats will be undertaken, and again, under the supervision of an ecologist.
Members, I think it's time to move to the vote. Are you happy to take all three together? Yes. Yes. Those in favour, please show. That's unanimous. Thank you very much for attending. You had a very long wait. Members, this is the last meeting. Members, I've been 3 years sitting here. I'd like to thank you all for the contributions you've made over the 3 years. I'm tempted to say that Councillor Garland has been very interesting from time to time, and I value everybody's contributions, but I have valued yours. So thank you very much. Meeting closed. Safe journey home. Yes, oh yes. That is a black pen. I still think of him as a mischievous pixie. So.
That's not what you said when he was leader of the council.
No, it wasn't, but he hasn't been leader of the council. I have. Maybe he's got it. Okay, thank you. Thank you. I've been a bit more appreciative. Well, that's my last one, probably. So. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Yeah, very interesting. When we put forward you know, our group always says about now, which committees are 1, 2 and 3. I have not put this on yet, so I'm waiting to see what, because Martin Cox is the new leader. I said within reason, I'll do anything he asks. And he asks me, but my main interest is heritage, culture, and I'm not sure if I'm going to go back on the back bench. So we'll see what happens. Oh, I think I don't need to take that this time. Well, it's, I don't know what's going to happen next year. I just had this horrible feeling that I might finish with a nightmare about something will happen.
Yeah, see you later.